Good morning, everyone. We are now on Perek Tes, Mishna Beis. So the first Mishnah was discussing the law about a person who plants a field with truma seeds. And the rule is gedulei truma or ketruma. That which grows from truma has a status of truma. We mentioned yesterday it even has a status of truma while it's still connected to the ground. But this is a rabbinic law. And therefore, even though the sages instituted that what grows from truma is like truma, which means only Kohanim can eat it, nonetheless, according to Torah law, this would have been a regular field. And therefore, the next Mishnah is going to discuss how this field is still treated like a regular field, even though that which grows is treated like truma. The point is that it's treated like truma that only a Kohen can eat it, but it's not treated like truma regarding for other things. It's not. So Mishnah Beis reads, "V'chayeves beleket v'shikha ubepeya." This field is obligated in leket, shikha, and peya. When a person has a field and they grow produce, there are certain things they have to leave for the poor. Now, when you're dealing with truma does not have something like truma. Typically, isn't treated with any of these obligations. These obligations typically take place even before the grain becomes truma. But truma is something that is you don't have to, when a Kohen gets truma, he doesn't have to separate from it for another Kohen, for a Levi, for the poor. None of those laws apply to him. Now, this field, though, although we treat that which grows like truma, and truma is typically exempt from the gifts that we give to a poor person. Nonetheless, here we say that this field that was growing with truma crops has the regular obligations of a regular field. Leket are the gleanings that fall when a person is cutting the grain or pulling out the grain and some of it falls to the ground. You have to leave it to the poor. Shikha means you have these sheaves of straw that have to be taken to be threshed. You forget one, you got to leave it for the poor. Peah is a corner of the field or part of the field that you have to leave for the poor. All these things apply to this field. So although what's growing from this field is treated as truma, since it's only midrabanan, since it's rabbinically that way, they didn't change anything else, and the laws that apply to a regular field would apply here as well. Now, Mishnah continues, "V'aniyeh Yisrael v'aniyeh kohanim alaktim." Both poor Kohanim or people who are not Kohanim that are poor can collect. Now, what they're going to collect is truma. They're not going to be able to eat it. Nonetheless, the Mishnah does not say only poor Kohanim can collect these things that we leave for the poor. Even non-Kohanim poor can collect it. Va'aniyeh Yisrael moichin shalahem l'kohanim b'dmei truma. Now, the poor and non-Kohanim, what are they going to do with it? It's truma. So they're going to sell it to other Kohanim who are allowed to eat it at the price of truma, because as we said before, truma grain, you won't get as much as for regular grain because it's limited who can eat it. And even the Kohanim have limitations sometimes to what they can do with it. And therefore, it doesn't sell for much. But at the end of the day, they're going to sell it as someone who sells truma. We had a case before. If a non-Kohen inherits truma from his maternal grandfather, there was a Kohen. He can't do anything with it. He sells it to a Kohen. So here too, the poor will sell it to the Kohen at the value of truma, v'hadamim shalahem, and the money is going to be theirs. This is not truma that automatically is supposed to be. It's not the truma we're supposed to be giving to a Kohen. It's what grew from truma kernels, which the sages gave an obligation of truma to. But again, they didn't make it like, so automatically belongs to the Kohen like other truma. It belongs to you. What are you going to do with it? You're going to have to sell it to a Kohen, but it belongs to you. And therefore, the money is yours to use for whatever you want. The money that you sell truma doesn't get the status of truma, so you can go ahead and use that money for whatever you would like to use it for. Okay. That's the Tanakama. That's the first opinion of the Mishnah. Rabbi Tarfon says, Lo yelaktu alaniyai kohanim. The only ones collecting here should be the poor Kohanim. Shema yishkachu v'yitnu l'seich piem, because we're afraid that as they are gleaning, as they're taking whatever they're taking, then they pop some in their mouth. You can't do that if you're not a Kohen. Because as we said before, the grain that grows is already truma. You don't have to do anything to it. It is already truma. And since it is already truma, therefore we say that, if you're not a Kohen, you're not allowed to eat it. So Reb Tarfon said, well, if that's so, there should be a concern that while they're actually collecting these things, they may pop some in their mouth. And they can't do that because it's truma. And therefore, Reb Tarfon says, only poor Kohanim can come and collect these gifts to the poor of leket, shikha, and peah. The Tanna Kama disagreed with Rabbi Tarfon, and he disagreed because people know that they're not supposed to eat truma, and therefore, knowing that they're dealing with truma, because they realize that this stuff is truma, because they're going to have to sell it to Kohanim, they're going to be careful. And Rabbi Tarfon is still concerned that as they are working, they're going to put some in, they're going to forget, put some in their mouth, they end up eating truma, and therefore, they should not be the only ones that are permitted, that we allow to come and collect, are the poor Kohanim. Rabbi Akiva said to him, Im kain, if so, meaning, if you have this concern that only poor Kohanim can come and collect, not poor non-Kohanim, because we're afraid they're going to put some in their mouth, they're going to forget that they're not allowed to, they're going to eat it. Im kain lo yalaktu ela tahirim. If so, then the only Kohanim that should be collected are the ones that are pure, that are tar. If a Kohen is tamei, he's not allowed to eat truma. If a poor Kohen is coming and collecting this grain and he's tamei, then we should be afraid he's going to pop some in his mouth also. And he's not allowed to do that because he's tamei. Because what grows from truma is treated like truma. And therefore, based on Rabbi Tarfon's argument, it should extend that only Kohanim that are pure should be collecting here, not Kohanim that aren't poor, that aren't pure, rather, because of the fact that we're afraid they're going to eat from it. So according to the Bar Tanura's interpretation here, Rabbi Akiva is arguing with Rabbi Tarfon, but actually adding, meaning he agrees with Rabbi Tarfon that only Kohanim should be collecting. But he adds to Rabbi Tarfon that if you're concerned that they're going to forget and pop it in their mouth, then we should be concerned that the poor Kohanim who are tamei may do the same thing. And therefore, they shouldn't be allowed in either. So according to Rabbi Akiva, only Kohanim that are pure will be allowed to collect this truma that's growing from the ground. So it's a three-way argument. Tanna Kama says the poor, anybody who's poor, all poor, even the non-Kohanim, we're allowed to collect here. Rabbi Tarfon says only the poor of the Kohanim. Rabbi Akiva says only the poor of the Kohanim that are pure. And the Bar Tanura says that we pass like Rabbi Akiva. Now, there's an interesting question here an interesting point that should be made. So now again, one thing is Rabbi Tarfon, who didn't extend things as far as Rabbi Akiva, he would say the Kohanim know that they have to be careful when they're eating truma not to eat it when they're impure, and therefore we can assume they'll be careful and not do it. Rabbi Akiva, and again, maybe perhaps because Yisraelim were more concerned, according to Rabbi Tarfon, of popping their mouth than Kohanim, because Kohanim tend to be, more aware and more careful about the truma that they're dealing with. Nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva said that we should be afraid that the Kohanim that are impure are going to do this, also pop it in their mouth, and they're not allowed to, and therefore we should not allow them to collect. Now, it comes out that everybody agrees that a Kohen who is impure may not eat any of this. The question is, do we allow him to collect lest he comes to eat it? But no one seems to have a problem with the fact that a Kohen who is tamei is collecting. We're afraid he's going to eat from it. If we wouldn't be afraid he's going to eat from it, then he'd collect. But he's tamei. The grain is truma. How's he allowed to touch the grain? He's going to make it tamei. Not allowed to do that. And the answer is because we're talking about the grain that is being harvested, right? The grain that's either just been harvested, or the grain that he himself is going to, if it's peah, he himself is going to cut it down. Now, the only time any food becomes tamei is if it comes to contact with liquid. If it came into contact with liquid while it's still in the ground, that doesn't make a difference. Meaning, if it rains on it while it's still connected to the ground, so then it doesn't become susceptible to tuma. That's the concept. The concept is that any food before it's going to become tamei has to become huchshel l'kabel tuma. It has to become prepared, so to speak. It has to become susceptible to tuma. How does susceptibility take place? By having liquid touch it. That's only to take place by the grain that is already detached from the ground. If it's still attached to the ground, then even if liquid touches it, it doesn't make it susceptible to tuma. So here we're talking about shortly after this grain has been cut down. And therefore, you know that it's not susceptible to tuma yet. And therefore, touching it is not a problem. Eating it is a problem. That's a separate prohibition. I'll eat truma. But the concern that the Kohen who's tameh is going to touch it and make it tameh, that's not going to be so much of a concern here because of the fact that it hasn't either yet been harvested or just recently harvested. If it got wet before, nothing, while it was still connected to the ground, doesn't make it acceptable to tuma. So if you touch it, nothing's going to happen. But what would come out according to the explanation is that if, let's say, you were talking about, the grain that was on the ground, it was already, it was leket, it was shikha, it was already harvested, but just sitting there, and then it rained. Then it would become susceptible to tuma, and then the kohen who's tameh wouldn't be able to touch it. So although the Mishna never discusses the problem with the kohen collecting these grains who's tameh, that's because we're talking about a situation, where the typical situation is going to be that it didn't have any liquid touch it yet since it has been harvested. While it's still connected to the ground, the liquid won't make acceptable to tuma, and therefore there is no problem with the kohen coming and doing the actual collecting. If he eats it, that's a problem, and that is where Rabbi Kiva said that we have to be concerned about kohen who's tameh that he may come to eat it, and therefore he's not allowed to come and collect. Okay, mitzvahs loisasa sherlidrosh ala mason, prohibition against inquiring of the dead. Shenamar, as it states, lo yamatzev acha v'deresh ala mason. The Torah lists a number of these people dealing in these sorcery, magic kind of stuff, otherworldly kind of stuff. And the Torah says it should not be found amongst you any of the people who do these things. And one of them, we mentioned already previously, other forms. And today is the form that's called Deresh Lamesim, inquiring of the dead. So how is this performed? We're talking about a situation, a person starves himself, and he sleeps in a cemetery. So that the mace, the dead person, should come to him in a dream. Let him know what he wants to ask him. Or he does some other kind of act. Doesn't specify what it is, that the body, that the actual dead person should come alive and let him know. Should come to him and let him know what he wants to know. Whoever does any of these things for that purpose gets lashes for doing so. This applies in all times, in all places, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.